I call the hearing to order. I'd like to welcome everyone that came this evening. I have a little synopsis here on the meeting tonight. This is the final hearing on the matter of the petition of the city of Thief River Falls and Bennington County to establishment of the Thief River West Side Flooddown Reduction Project number 178. Under consideration this evening hearing is the engineering report and recommendation. The board's report of the affected properties and water management district charges and the board's report of the damages. The purpose of this hearing is to review the engineer's project recommendations, charges, and damages received, comment from those affected by the project. The proceedings are being recorded in order to preserve the record. The order of business for this hearing will be as follows. First, our attorney will review the procedural history of the project proceeding, the purpose of the hearing, confirmation of notices, and the decision standard for the board. Our attorney will be followed by the engineer who will present details of the proposed project to include its alignment and benefit, providing the properties affected. After the engineer's presentation, our attorney, administrator, and engineer will review the affected areas by the project. The various sources of the project, determination of the project charge, and determination of the project damages. Following the staff presentation, I will open up the hearing for public comment. The board would like to hear your comments on the proposed project and the information relevant to the purpose. During the public hearing, managers may ask staff or consultants make presentations of any comments in order to clarify any testimony. In addition, if any member of the public asks a question and a matter believes that the response from district staff or district consultant can readily resolve the question or enrich the testimony, the manager may ask to have the appropriate staff member consultant speak to the question. I will exercise my judgment as to whether or not to allow such discussion. More discussion will occur after all the members of the public have had a chance to speak and the public comment period has been closed. More discussion may occur and be concluded at this meeting as the board decides. If a member of the public would like to make a comment at an appropriate time, please stand and address the board when I recognize you. Speak clearly and state your name and address for the record. If you have specific questions concerning the proposed project, you may ask our administrator, engineer, legal counsel to respond. If you have anything else ready to wish to submit, you can provide it to me before the close of the meeting. To ensure that all wishing to comment on the proposed repair have time to speak, I may limit the time to any speaker with more than 5 minutes. Please limit redundant and repetitive comments. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to John Cole. He's our attorney on this project.
Mr. President, members of the board, members of the public, if anyone can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll speak up, and if I have to, I'll go up and use the microphone. But if you can all hear me from here, I'm going to speak from here. I'm going to present just a summary of the procedural process that gets us to the hearing tonight. I'm also going to talk about the board's decision standard for establishment of this project. And before I get going, I want just to let everybody know, because I know some of you are here with very specific concerns, but I will tell you that we already know that there are properties north of town in sections 16, 17, 20, and 21 that are served by a spur ditch of County Ditch or County Ditch 70 that takes your drainage directly to the river, and that those properties likely do not place any burden on this flood damage reduction project. And so the board is already, they're already aware of that, and so likely an outcome tonight will be to adjust the charged areas in that portion of the project area. So we want to hear your comments, but just to let you know up front that is an issue that the board is aware of and that it intends to address as part of the establishment, so we don't without justification add people to the water management district charge that aren't going to be placing a burden on the flood damage reduction project. The other thing I will say up front is that we are aware for several of the properties, and I think there are 7 or 8 of them, I mean less than 10 for sure, where the diversion channel is going to be constructed, where there is a proposal to award damages for right-of-way, that the board has engaged an appraiser to determine the better numbers based on comparable sales for that damage value, and the board will likely be deferring a decision on the award of damages to a continued date. So again, we want to hear your comments on that, But we also want you to know that we have hired an appraiser to come up with a better determination or a better recommendation for those damage values. Just for reference for everyone here, this is a project that is included in the watershed management plan for the Red Lake Watershed District. It is also a project that was petitioned by Pennington County and the City of Thief River Falls as a flood damage reduction project. That was back in the fall of 2017. And following those petitions, the board adopted an order initiating the project. That doesn't establish the project. It just initiates proceedings. In doing so, it appointed an engineer, Nate Gallagher and FDR Engineering, to develop a preliminary scope and preliminary design plans, and also then to look at what was the area that was going to be served or provided a level of protection by the flood damage reduction project, what drainage efficiencies were going to be created by the project, and what was the relative benefit of those as well, and then also to submit that preliminary plan and to receive advisory reports from the Board of Water, Soil Resources and the Department of Natural Resources. The preliminary plan was submitted to both agencies in the summer of 2018, and the board received advisory reports from both entities in July 18th from the Board of Water and Soil Resources and July 23rd, 2018 from the Department of Natural Resources. Both agencies' comments were supportive of the project. Both agency comments contained some recommendations for additional analysis, which was performed by the engineer in the preparation of a final report in anticipation of today's hearing. In the interim, the board has also undertaken several steps to facilitate additional funding from outside of the watershed district for this project. So the board authorized an application for flood hazard mitigation grant from the state of Minnesota. We've received confirmation and a commitment for that funding. We'll talk about that when we talk about how the project is ultimately going to be funded. The board has coordinated with the Minnesota Department of Transportation on funding for certain crossings that are facilitated by the project. That we'll talk about as well. We asked for a project match from the Red River Watershed Management Board. They've received a certain amount of money from that, which again we'll talk about when we get into the financing of the project. And so what is left then is the local direct share of the project, which the board has capped at $500,000. And that's one of the things we'll talk about tonight with regard to the charges, the Watershed Management District charges that will be used to generate a portion of the cost of this project. In anticipation of the hearing tonight, we provided notices. Some of you received special notices if you are one of the owners of property over which an interest is going to be acquired, so the right-of-way. Those notices were published, mailed, and posted. And for some of you, again, because there's going to be an acquisition of a property interest, the sheriff had to serve those notices on you. So hopefully you weren't alarmed by that. It's just a legal process that we have to follow. So those notices were all completed by May 9th. And we have also submitted all required applications for regulatory permits to the applicable agencies, and those applications were completed and submitted on May 9th as well. The decision standard, Mr. President and Board, here's what you have to do tonight. You have to hear all parties interested for and against the establishment of the proposed project. You have to consider whether the evidence supports confirmation of the engineering report and whether the evidence supports the allocation of a portion of cost to a water management district upon which charges will be based. You also will be considering damages related to the acquisition of right-of-way for the project, but as we've already discussed, it is likely that final consideration and adoption of those damages will be deferred to a continued hearing date. Considering comments about the project, the proposed charges, and project funding and damage awards, you have to consider all the evidence presented at this hearing. After considering the evidence, you'll eventually be called upon to adopt findings in an order establishing the project. Again, we're going to be recommending that you give guidance to staff and that you continue the hearing for the purpose of considering those findings in that order. If the evidence presented at the hearing and the comments that you hear tonight call into question aspects of the engineer's report, aspects of the charges, aspects of damages, or other material issues related to the project, you can direct modification or re-examination. So again, when we talk about those properties north of town in section 16, 17, 20, and 21 that are served by that spur ditch of CD 70, that would be one of those things you could have us go back and re-examine whether or not the charges on those properties should be changed based on their either demand for project capacity or the burden that they're going to be placing on the project. Similarly, as to the damage awards, we had used a formula that the district had used in the past for damage for right-of-way acquisition. But again, I am assuming tonight we're going to hear lots of comments about whether that formula was appropriate. And again, you've already started a process to have an appraiser look at that to give you what I think will likely be a better and better valuation of those damages. So again, that's one of those issues that you can defer for consideration. But if after everything else you hear, you find that the project will be conducive to the public health, promote the general welfare of the region, and be in compliance with the watershed law and your watershed management plan, then you can order establishment of the project. And in ordering the establishment of the project, you can authorize construction and implementation of the project as a whole or in different parts, in phases as necessary. And again, we're going to be recommending at the close of the testimony tonight that you do continue the hearing for the consideration of the findings and an order potentially establishing the project, and that you further continue the hearing for to take additional comments on the damage awards once the appraisal reports are completed and we give an update of proposed damage payments to those landowners affected by that. Subject to any questions the board may have, Mr. President, I will be followed by the engineer for a presentation of the proposed project.
Nate Gallagher with FDR Engineering. Thank you, John.
There we go. I'm not as loud as John Cole. Good evening. County Ditch 70 is indicated by this blue line on this map, originating northwest of Thief River Falls and draining into town, past Petrol Pumper, and alongside the Articat Road there, and then heading east to the river by the bowling alley. We all know these areas quite well. We'll also talk tonight a little bit about another drainage system called County Ditch 1, which is indicated in yellow there. And the County Ditch 70 was the source of historical and chronic drainage problems originating back to the early 1900s. As we saw this spring, it didn't take much to create quite a scene in town. A lot of what we do in the water management business is there's a lot of legalities that we speak of and a lot of administrative things to consider. And so what I'm showing you here with this map is shaded areas that represent what they call benefited areas that are associated with each drainage system. And they factor heavily then in what we can do legally and how we manage systems. And especially when we propose another project, things kind of get laid on top of each other and it adds some legal complexities. But you can see between County Ditch 70 here in the blue, the County Ditch 1 benefited area, and then there's actually a major county system called 96 here in these black dash lines. There's a lot of overlap of benefited areas even, including this hatched area here would be where there's some overlapping between Ditch 70 and Ditch 1. And I just show you that to explain sometimes historically things are muddled, and we're trying to make that clear here going forward with this proposed project. As John said, in October, petition was received from the city and the county requesting that a project be considered to develop FDR benefits and protections and diverting potential floodwaters around the improved urban area affected and to provide proper channelization of floodwaters to protect agricultural lands and urban area infrastructure improvements located and known to the public parts as CD 70 and CD 1. The other important factor to consider is that the Minnesota Department of Transportation was seriously planning and considering a project along Highway 1 and 59 there, just essentially at the petrol pumper intersection, and I apologize, I call it that because everybody knows what that is, but and going east of the town, considering up to 3 roundabouts. So this is the intersection of 1 and 59, and on through Barzin and Brooks would potentially have roundabouts and associated infrastructure, including eliminating the ditches and putting things underground in storm sewer, and in association diverting floodwaters away from this area. So it was an opportunity for the city, the county, the watershed, the DOT, and other interests to kind of combine forces, achieve an economy of scale with the project and overall save money. Because if you look at it this way, the DOT could have come in and done this project on their own. They never would have really dealt with the flooding problem. They just would have sized things accordingly at their own cost, but the problem would have still brought all this water through town. So the project partner saw an opportunity to collaborate with the DOT and make it a better project for all concerned. And later on in the public comment period, the DOT here is available to speak to that. The goals for the project then are to address the drainage issues and outlet stability issues associated with Ditch 70 and Ditch 1 systems, as well as then long-term provide 100-year flood protection for the urban areas and a 10-year service for the agricultural areas, which means if we were to get a flood that would come along once in 100 years, this project is designed to prevent that, as well as agricultural areas now that are flooding every other year, every year. Now, hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to have better drainage such that they're only going to flood once every 10 years. Those are the goals. The goals are also to include a plan for future development. In other words, this project is designed as if a large portion of this urban area of the city of Thief River Falls will eventually be developed, will be parking lots, rooftops, streets, etc., so that we have the capacity to deal with that increased floodwater as it may come along. And then, make no mistake, this is also occurring in the vicinity of Ditchkey and Articat and other businesses, and looking forward, the city especially wanted to look at this project as an opportunity to address the orderly and safe development of the city on the west side and going south, such that it would have the ability to manage water well into the future. This is an example of what the 100-year floodplain could look like if the project were not implemented. And so you've got like the Ditchkey and Articat area down here where Ditch 70 comes through. And so all these areas here, which would just stack water mile after mile, will essentially be eliminated by this project, or at least drastically reduced. So how did we look at this? We looked at several different alignments and alternatives to manage this water, up to and including using the existing alignment of County Ditch 70. Well, what we found with that existing alignment was, with existing infrastructure in place, roads, buildings, utilities, and the size that drainage would have to be in order to take enough flow for a 100-year event, it was basically impossible to fit that into the existing space, and the cost associated with following the existing alignment of County Ditch 70 as the chosen alternative for the goal stated was not selected primarily due to cost and effects to the local surrounding environment. Then we looked at another alternative where we came through here kind of along the south side of the Lessa Sanitation building, so we would come down the bypass and then head east through here, and that was also looked at as an alternative. And given that there's no crossing under the railroad and Highway 32, and you would have to essentially drop that water 20 feet in a structure, in a constructed structure to the river, that was also dismissed as an alternative due to cost. We finally looked at an alternative right, actually this is where that's middle alternative was, and then we looked at an alternative that would bring the water along the west side of the current bypass, south along Highway 32, and then would drop into an existing drainage way there just kind of on the west side of the airport. Okay, and I'm sure we've all seen that. It's kind of an eroding channel that's dropping to the river. And that was looked at as the third alternative then in a series of alternatives analysis that we completed basically about a year ago, which then brought the board to order further investigations on this south alternative. Now, Dylan, did we have the Wi-Fi set up on the laptop? Awesome. So this existing alignment then, we're going to give you a bit of an overview of that. Okay, so right now at this point, this would be the intersection of Highway 1 and 59, and north is to our left. So we're going to follow the existing alignment of County Ditch 70 as we move through town. Past, this is West Side Motors, other businesses. We're heading east now into town on Highway 1 and 59, and then that's where this drainage stops and it turns and it goes south right here, and it goes adjacent to an apartment building and makes its way to Greenwood Street. There's that apartment building, we just went over that. This photo is a little bit dated, so this would be where the DigiKey expansion is going on now. There's DigiKey, the present building, and here we're turning onto Greenwood Street now. And so this is the existing course of Ditch 70, and there, of course, is the Greenwood Street Bridge where it outlets. And what you would find with that alternative was, again, look at all that infrastructure. There just wasn't the space to provide the conveyance then for that alternative without causing incredible impacts compared to some of the other alternatives. The middle alternative then, which I had stated goes just on the south side of Lessa Sanitation, that looks basically something like this. That this is Lessa Sanitation, here's Highway 32. It would come from the bypass on the north side of the Ashwood Heights subdivision that was platted a couple of years ago, and it would turn and come, and it would there'd be a new crossing under Highway 32, and then dropping down into this old oxbow, and you'd basically be slipping in here. I believe that's the ODC there, so which was that building. And again, that was dismissed primarily due to cost compared to some of the other alternatives. The final alternative I'll cover then was this southern alignment that follows the bypass along Highway 32 into the river. And at the river, it looks something like this, where you're following Highway 32, you go under 7 and turn, and then you follow that eroding channel to the river. And we'll take another aerial view of that. And from this vantage point now, we're starting at that south curve of the bypass. Okay, so we're already south of town. This alignment would be on the west side of this road in this existing western ditch. It's just that we would make it deeper and wider to convey all the water that would come in that direction. And these are where right-of-way impacts, of course, that we'll talk about. Because of the expansion of the ditch, there's certain right-of-ways that are needed from those landowners. And then that alignment would turn and follow be on the west side of the railroad. We actually looked at possibly using the Highway 32 ditch, but that would mean that we'd have to move the railroad west, and even moving that fairly short distance of railroad was cost prohibitive, $3 to $5 million just to move the railroad about 150 feet to the east. So you can see here, this is where the proposed diversion channel would come in, and then we follow that to the river. And then this is where ditch 1 presently comes in, and that would be consolidated with our proposed project with a fortified and stabilized outlet. A couple of different nuances as far as that south alignment is around the safe key storage and the Evergreen implement dealer here at the corner of 1 and 59. We looked at alternatives where we would have gone straight to the intersection and south, and then we also looked at alternatives where we would come along essentially the west side of that complex and then back to the bypass. And we even looked at other extreme alternatives where we would have followed this road south. And we've come to a consensus that the preferred alignment is to go essentially on the back side of these businesses and on the south side. But until we work out details with landowners, the precise alignment of that portion of the south alignment has not been determined, because there's some ongoing landowner issues that will be addressed by the appraisal and so forth at a future meeting. Okay, so how do we make these determinations? How do we develop sizes and develop a project like this? We got to come up with a hydrology, right? So right now the existing system provides 10 to 25-year protection in a lot of the urban areas, and quite frankly about 2-year protection in a lot of the ag areas. They're seeing flooding and water problems on an almost annual basis, and in June 2017 we had a 1.5 to 2 inch rain, and we basically filled up the ditch and flooded all the adjacent fields with just a simple summer June rain, which, to give you an idea of the frequencies, a 2-year rain is about 2.5 inches, 10-year is 3.7, and a 100-year 24-hour storm, which means how much rain falls in 24 hours, is about 6.3 inches over the entire drainage area, and all that would then of course run through town and through ditch 70. That was that same June event. The other consideration then is, as this community evolves and develops, we're looking at effectively this entire west area and going south past the hospital as potentially not only contributing to this proposed project, but being developed in some way, shape, or form. So we have to account for that in our hydrology and our sizing and our capacities, which we have done, such that we're not going to go back 15 years from now and have to do a bunch of rework and make things greater size, etc. But with that said, I think it was no secret. The recommended alternative is the south alignment following the county road bypass, west along Highway 32 and to the river, with the alignment here to be determined based on additional work that is yet to occur. With that proposed project, there will be a lot of enhancements and improvements done up to and including working with the city sewage lagoons on their discharge and adding culvert outlets that have some more oxygenation introduced to them, sidewater inlets where all the adjacent drainage coming off from fields will now go through a pipe and won't be eroding and washing into the drainage way. We'll also stabilize this channel downstream that is currently eroding, and there's other amenities that are being incorporated as the project moves forward. Talking about that outlet just a little bit, you can kind of see the schematic here. Right now, the water just rushes through the railroad bridge and Highway 32 and makes its way to the Red Lake River, and through the introduction of some rock drops, we are planning to then turn that into kind of an amenity, something that will look good, something that won't be eroding and falling apart. This is another example of what that could look like if this was the proposed channel coming in. It would exit the box culverts at Highway 32 and then it would drop. That's what these red areas indicate, is that's a velocity indication through our hydraulic modeling. And then it would just safely flow into the Red Lake River without eroding that channel. Other project information includes, for example, how big is this ditch going to be? In general terms, it's going to have a 15-foot bottom. It's going to have a 0.1 slope, which means it's going to drop about 5 feet every mile. And it's going to have spoil that is required from the excavation that is placed on the field side in all cases, and then there will be a shallow enough slope such that the landowner will be able to farm that spoil area post-project after about 2 years after the project is done. So specifically, right down here now, this is where the railroad is. Here's what it looks like. You'll have the railroad, you'll have the 15-foot bottom ditch, and then you'll have the spoil with the sidewater inlet in the cases where the field drainage is coming in. So that's what the cross-section looks like here along Highway 32. Along the bypass then, you're coming off the existing highway, coming down 15 feet. You can see what the existing ditch looks like. This is a cross-section now, like a slice through the road. There's a lot of earth that's being taken out to make that channel deeper and wider to convey the water and have the capacity to manage the flows that we intend to do. And then you can see what the spoil will look like, and then there will be these temporary impacts during construction that will also be part of the compensation for the damages to the landowners involved. So that's just an example of right-of-way, and as John had stated, there's less than 10 directly affected landowners in terms of permanent right-of-way that will need to be acquired. Some other things I've mentioned then with this project are the City of Thief River Falls, it cooperatively is placing storm sewer here where County Ditch 70 now, when we took that aerial flight, runs down and south and then turns and goes to the river by the bowling alley. That will all be underground storm sewer. Okay? It will look like this. So right now there's an existing road and there's a ditch full of cattails and garbage and standing water. That will be storm sewer placed and buried over, so you basically have a mobile grass swale. But it's important for me to state that is just a cooperative part of this project. It is not part of the flood damage reduction project. It is not part of the water management district assessment that we'll discuss. It's just some of the other work that's going on cooperatively with this project is being paid through other means through the City of Thief River Falls. Other opportunities and additional considerations are on both County Ditch 70 and County Ditch 1. There is the opportunity to do other drainage improvements upon petition if landowners want to pursue that. In other words, this project is going to give an outlet that will lower water surface elevations at least 3 feet compared to what's there now. So now the drainage areas of these legal drainage systems upstream have an outlet that they can drain better to, so they could petition and add to the improvements of their system upstream of that. And by that I mean, so this is where the FDR project starts, right? This is where it heads into town, heads east, and on its way. Well, if you go upstream on County Ditch 70, these landowners could petition the watershed to do a ditch improvement for that system. As well as County Ditch 1 here, with the stabilized outlet, could now come in and do drainage enhancements as they would choose or wish to do so. Also associated with the project, we're looking at a couple of areas specifically that would be, well, it's really just this one on 130th here. So this is just kind of north and east of the Ralph, etc. The project includes storm sewer, metal storm sewer for 700 feet approximately that would drain to here, and then it goes west to our diversion channel and kind of goes into that MnDOT project I mentioned earlier. I also want to point out that the storm sewer for the city will be here, which is on the, I guess it's adjacent to Enbridge, right? So there's some other features to this project that are being incorporated to deal with some of the problem floodwater that we have. And so that's just areas that can be improved. And then again, the landowners then to the north of this storm sewer going north could improve that ditch and bring that into our project. And that is not, this 130th now is not a part of the legal system of County Ditch 70, but it could be petitioned in as a lateral and brought into this project. So that is examples of not only what this project is, but what else can be to enhance and improve people's drainage in the area. So that's the recommended alternative. That flood damage reduction project is estimated at $4.6 million. And again, that does not include the city storm sewer I referenced earlier. That's a separate component, but it's important to just make that clear because it is part of the overall construction contract that would be let at some point if the project proceeds. I'm going to talk quickly about funding partners, and then I think the engineers portion would be done, and then we were going to step into the water management district discussion and other things. But it's important that I just identify, depending on how you count this, there's up to 7 funding partners for this project, which is just an amazing example of coordination, working together and trying to enhance each other's capacity to get things done. If you break that down, it's about 50% watershed, city, county, and MnDOT. Minnesota Flood Damage Reduction Grant Program comes in at 25. The Red River Watershed Management Board is paying about 17%, and then finally, depending on how the thing shakes out, the benefiting landowners then could be assessed up to about 8% of the project cost, pending your input tonight and board decisions. So I think with that, I'm going to just cover what's left to do. The project still has to be established. This hearing is kind of the precursor to whether or not the board establishes the project. But if they do, we would do the final design, get the funding managed and the water management district details resolved, and then essentially, depends on what you call spring around here, but this thing would be let potentially this summer now, with construction this fall and then all of next year in 2020. So that is the engineering portion, and I think I've got graphics now that support the water management district discussion, but I think, John, you wanted to kind of address that?
Yeah, I think, could we actually go back to the slide that had all the funding partners? I want to give Myra a chance to walk through who's providing what of that $4.6 million engineer's opinion of cost.
Right. You want this?
So, can anyone hear me? Everyone hear me? All right, so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to pay for this project, right? I mean, we all understand the tax situation. We all understand the local burden on projects. We've been doing this stuff for quite a few years, so we get that. So we spent a lot of time, like Nate said, working with partnerships. There was already incorporating projects within the city to help augment the price of the project. So one of the things that I tried to tell the landowners when they called me on their levy of, it was a $500,000 is what we used for your, what we call property owners reports. We knew that that was the worst case scenario. Because the statute requires us to give the landowners a probable cost, we had to have a number. At that time, it was close to $500,000, slightly less. So the board determined that we would use $500,000 as a starting point for our property owners report. Since the board made that determination, we did get some additional funding in. So I'm just going to go through real quickly. Nate kind of touched on it there, but I'm going to go a little more. With the flood damage reduction hazard mitigation grant from the state of Minnesota, that was $1.5 million. That required the watershed district to apply for a flood damage reduction grant through the state of Minnesota for their flood damage hazard mitigation bonding. City played a very good part in the county, as well as trying to get that funding amped up on the ladder from the bonding money, because there's a whole pile of money that was appropriated in the state of Minnesota last year for bonding was $20 million. 4.5 came to the Red River Valley. Of that, we got 1.5 for this project alone. So it took a good effort by DOT and all the partners that was working on this project to let our legislators know that this money and this project was something real to the area, and that we really needed to ramp up the funding for it. So with that, we got the $1.5 million from the state of Minnesota. With that, it's a 50-50 cost share grant with the state. So through the flood damage reduction work group and the Red River Watershed Management Board, that's established through a combination of watershed districts pooling their money for flood hazard mitigation projects such as this. The Red River Watershed Management Board gave $1 million to this project. And we still were $500,000 short for the state grant. So the watershed district put in $500,000. So that secured the $3 million that was needed for that state grant. After that came when we started talking with the county, and the county said, well, we got some road funding that comes through on an annual basis, and they felt they could do County Road 7 and 62, I believe, to the tune of somewhere around $250,000. And that's funds that they already had in their funding mechanism for bridges and roads. So they said we could use that funding for that project because we had to go through 2 of their county roads. Minnesota Department of Transportation, a huge partner in this, they already had a project going. They didn't care where the water went with their roundabout. They just knew that they had to deal with it. So if they brought it into town, so be it. But we knew that that wasn't the best alternative. Cindy knew that. So they petitioned their watershed district to divert the water to the south along the bypass. So with that, the DOT committed funding for the project through Highway 1. We also applied for a clean water, or the Department of Transportation partnership grant, and received $400,000 for the pipe through Highway 32 south of Thief River Falls. So with that, the DOT, just for the flood damage reduction portion of the project, is committing $960,000 to the project. Then after the board had initiated the $500,000 cap to the Water Management District, we went, if you guys have heard about the One Watershed, One Plan that's been going on throughout the state of Minnesota, we happen to have a pilot project up here in northwestern Minnesota, which was the Red Lake River One Watershed, One Plan. That was approved, and John had mentioned the Water Management District. It had to be amended, or we had to amend the plan to include a Water Management District to do this project. So it's just one thing after another that we went through. But make a long story short, we ended up getting $176,000 from the One Watershed, One Plan, because it's a clean water fund. That was to stabilize that outlet channel from Highway 32 to the river. So of that approximate cost of $220,000 to do that erosion control project, what was going to be paid for by the local share of the project, $176,000 of that is going to be paid for by clean water funds now. So, you know, we get the tax situation, and we understand the burden it is on locals, you know, for everything. I mean, it's not just watershed tax, it's not county tax, city tax, you know, we get it. So we're out there trying to get all the funding we can for these projects before we come to you at the hearing. So with that, I mean, you know, the $500,000, I told all the ones who talked to me that was the max. That's the worst it's going to look. But we already know it's better. So I'll just leave it at that.
Nate, can you go back to the storm frequency slide you had? This one, you can find it.
Just so it had the rainfall amounts?
Yep. Okay, so if you can't see this, or if you're wondering where to look down here in this little blue box down here. Early on in Nate's presentation, he showed a slide that showed, you know, the flood damage or the flood challenge, the high water or the excessive water challenges that you are dealing with in this storm event right here, this 2.5 inches in 24 hours. Okay? This project intends to create a diversion channel which provides an alternate outlet for a portion or most of the County Ditch 70 watershed to serve this level of storm, at 3.7 inches in 24 hours. So when we talk about a 2-year storm, 10-year storm, 100-year storm, a 100-year storm has a 1% chance of occurring in any rainstorm you get, 1%. So we roll dice 1% of the time, even though it probably seems like it happens most, but that's the probability on that. 10-year, it's more frequent. We roll the dice, that's going to happen, is that 10% then? Has a 10% probability, and the 2-year storm has a 50% probability of occurring. Okay, so what this project is intended to do is improve the level of service from something that's currently less than this, less than the 2-year storm, to something around the 10-year storm at the outlet. I want to stress that the drainage improvement is a secondary benefit. The primary benefit is to remove flood damage. And if you can go to the map now with the Water Management District name. Thank you. I think this will be the last choreography I'm going to have you do. All right. So understand now that the CD70 water comes down this way, takes a turn to the east, goes through the middle of town, and hits the river. And this little spur right here handles most storms, brings them directly to the river. But when the water's really high, you get overflow from here going this way and this way. And so when this diversion gets built, takes the water down south of town and puts it in, what we're actually doing is we're freeing up capacity here so that it doesn't overflow into this, my laser, so that it doesn't overflow to the east. And we're also freeing up capacity in town so that we don't have that flood damage in town. And the secondary benefit to that is that we do free up capacity at the outlet, which means that both CD1 and CD70 could potentially support some improved drainage. Okay. Now, when we looked at how do we determine how to set up a charge system in here, we started with the contributing watershed of CD70. Where does that water go? And what burden is that water going to place on the diversion channel? And so that's that area that's highlighted in green and a little bit of salmon color and purple and blue. That's that area that when the storm hits there, a portion of the discharge from that storm is going to burden the outlet channel. A portion of it's going to continue to go through the normal channel of CD70, but the larger storms are going to be handled by the diversion. And so because of that, we had to determine what level of service or improved service where land's going to provide. So if we had lands, for example, that right now flood every time you get 1 inch of rain, but by freeing up capacity in CD7, and understand this is theoretical, don't hold me to this, but as far as the modeling goes, this is our best estimation that once that diversion gets built and we free up capacity in CD70, those lands that may have water issues in the smaller storms are going to have less water issues in the smaller storms. And in the bigger storms, we're going to handle that water better. So depending on the level of service provided to certain acres within that green shaded area, or mostly green shaded area, that's how the allocation of charge is set up. So when we set up a water management district, it's basically a special charging district. And if we say we have to raise $500,000 over the course of however many years from the water management district, then we have this formula that allocates that $500,000 among all the properties in there. And Nate can probably talk to the technical aspects of that, but really what it boils down to is we have acre classifications, and those acre classifications are based on the improved protection or the improved drainage, if you want to call it that, from those parcels. And some of you have a better improvement than others, and that's why you've been classified differently. And again, the board's already established this. It was established by plan amendment. But it's just a matter now of the allocation of project costs. So again, The max allocation of this total project that's going to go to the Water Management District is $500,000. That's the planning number we're using. And then the distribution of that allocation is based on this formula that talks about what level of service is a certain land acre being provided. And Nate can maybe go into some detail on that just to be sure, because I think that's what the color coding states.
Right. So, as John was describing, the amount that a particular landowner is being assessed is based on the benefit that is being realized if the project is built. And for starters, then, hopefully you can all read this, but there's basically 5 categories we have. And the first one I'll highlight is this area up here to the north along this lateral that flows east. When we set up the Water Management District originally, it was based on the benefited area of Ditch 70. So it was kind of a blind administrative decision, a starting point to establish this concept. And what we've come to determine, and a lot of you will understand this, is this area does not contribute to the footprint of the project. It's still within the Water Management District, but it receives a no charge. Okay? Some of you received letters. That was because of, as I stated, that was the original administrative assumption, is that we were tying it to the benefited area of Ditch 70. Well, when the board finally orders this project, those details will be addressed. Okay? So that letter was a starting point, and I apologize if there was some confusion and concern over that, as I know there was some. Okay? Other areas then, the green areas, include everybody who has water, even portions of water, that for a 100-year storm make it to the footprint of the project and ultimately to the outlet down here. And that's simply an outlet charge. In other words, everybody is paying their share for the right to drain their water into this system such that it safely makes its way to the river. It's just kind of, your water's got to go somewhere. In Minnesota, there's drainage law that causes us to then pay for some of that as our fair share. Then some of these other areas are simply areas that are greater benefited due to the proposed project than others. In some cases, if you already have a 10-year level of service, but you're being improved to a 25-year level of service, if you have a 2-year and you're getting to a 10-year and so on, there's different measures of how much better your drainage will be with this project, and those lands that are being assessed at slightly higher rates than everybody that has the base rate. And along those lines, then, there was this caveat, I'm going to go quickly to that, which was here, that was to state, outside the city limits, you would be capped at 20 acres. In other words, if you were an ag landowner and you had a quarter section of land, 160 acres, you wouldn't be assessed on all 160 of those acres because you were simply paying an outlet fee. You weren't necessarily benefiting, getting a drainage benefit, so it was at that base rate. So that was one caveat, is that the max assessment for that parcel would be 20 acres. The other one was within the city limits, then that was given a minimum of a 2.0 multiplier times the base rate because of the known impervious surfaces and the propensity for the city areas to drain more and to cause more burden on the drainage system. So those were two major kind of caveats to the equation that were brought in to address the fair and equitable caveats. And then finally, the Water Management District boundaries will be refined to the areas only draining into the footprint of the project after this public hearing and then pending board action going forward. Okay, so I think that really kind of covers the nuances of that. I could go through some of these slides, but this was a letter that somebody received, and you can see that, you know, in the end there's this number down here in the bottom that applied to this particular landowner in terms of their benefits. Now, I think it's important then to look at how does that result to me personally as a landowner. So I've got 3 quick examples then of what that really means. So in example 1 here, and we work from left to right, if I have 1 acre and I'm out in that base rate area, I'm really not getting a drainage benefit from the project, but I am getting an outlet, I'm paying an outlet charge. Well, that total charge is approximately $81.65. That's the charge for that acre. And if you were to pay that upon being assessed, you could pay that in one check for $81, or what's going to happen is the county's going to include that on your taxes over a period